Captain Jake Morrison had seen his fair share of impossible situations during his 20-year career as a deep space pilot. But nothing had prepared him for this. His small scout vessel hung motionless in the void, life support systems failing one by one, while the massive hulk of an alien starship drifted barely 50 meters away. The emergency had struck without warning. A cascade failure in his ship's fusion reactor had left him stranded in the outer rim of the Kepler system, far from any shipping lanes or rescue beacons. His distress signal would take weeks to reach the nearest human outpost, and his oxygen would run out in less than 48 hours. Jake pressed his face against the viewport, studying the enormous vessel that had appeared on his sensors just hours before his reactor died. The ship was unlike anything in the human fleet databases. Its hull was a deep black material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, and massive engine pods jutted from its rear section like the wings of some cosmic insect. More importantly, the alien ship showed signs of catastrophic damage. Gaping holes torn through multiple sections revealed darkened corridors within. Debris fields surrounded the vessel, suggesting it had been drifting here for years, possibly decades. But Jake's trained eye caught something the automated sensors had missed. Deep within the ship's hull, a faint blue glow pulsed rhythmically. Power. Somehow, after all this time, something inside that massive derelict was still alive. Jake made his decision quickly. His emergency thruster pack had enough fuel for a one-way trip to the alien vessel. If he could find a way inside and locate whatever power source was still functioning, he might have a chance of survival. It was a desperate gamble. But staying put meant certain death. The journey across the void took 43 minutes. Jake's magnetic boots clanged against the alien hull as he landed near what appeared to be an airlock. The metal felt strange beneath his feet, almost organic in its texture. The geometric patterns up close revealed themselves to be some kind of writing system, flowing symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The airlock mechanism was completely foreign, but Jake had spent years working with salvaged alien tech from various species humanity had encountered. Most spacefaring races faced similar engineering challenges, and certain design principles transcended species barriers. After 15 minutes of careful examination, he located what seemed to be an emergency access panel. Inside the panel, crystalline components glowed softly with their own internal light. Jake recognized the basic concept, even if the execution was alien. Emergency systems. Backup power. Universal design principles at work. He pressed a sequence of the crystals based on patterns he'd learned from Centauri emergency systems. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then the airlock suddenly cycled with a deep thrumming sound that vibrated through his entire body. The inner chamber filled with atmosphere, and Jake's suit sensors indicated it was surprisingly close to human breathable. Slightly higher oxygen content than Earth normal, with trace gases his suit couldn't identify. But nothing immediately toxic. The gravity was lighter than Earth standard, making his movements feel almost bouncy. Emergency lighting flickered to life as he moved deeper into the ship, revealing corridors that stretched far beyond his helmet lamps. The architecture was distinctly non-human. Ceilings curved overhead in organic sweeps, and the walls were covered with the same flowing script he'd seen outside. But the basic layout made sense. Main corridors, branching passages, what were clearly lift shafts leading to other levels. Jake's engineering mind began cataloging everything he observed. The materials were incredibly advanced, showing no signs of corrosion or degradation, despite the obvious age of the vessel. The emergency lighting system was responding to his presence, activating sections ahead of him and dimming areas behind, suggesting sophisticated automated systems were still functional. More intriguing were the signs of the ship's original inhabitants. Workstations were built for beings roughly human-sized but with longer arms, based on the reach required for various control surfaces. The corridors were high enough to accommodate creatures perhaps 8 feet tall. Most telling were the emergency instruction panels scattered throughout the ship, featuring pictographic representations of tall, slender beings with elongated limbs. As Jake ventured deeper, following the strongest power readings on his suit's sensors, he began to piece together what had happened to this vessel. Blast damage in several corridors suggested internal explosions. Sealed blast doors indicated automated containment procedures had activated. Most ominously, he found several areas where the deck plating had been torn up from below, as if something had been trying to break out rather than break in. The power source drew him steadily toward what his readings suggested was the ship's engineering section. The corridors here were wider, with massive conduits running along the walls and ceiling. The blue glow he'd seen from outside was much stronger now, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded Jake uncomfortably of a heartbeat. He found the engineering bay behind a partially sealed blast door. The chamber beyond was enormous, easily large enough to house his entire scout ship. At its center sat the most beautiful piece of technology Jake had ever seen. The power core was a sphere of crystalline material suspended in a web of energy conduits. It rotated slowly on multiple axes, each rotation causing waves of blue light to pulse through the connecting systems. The engineering consoles surrounding it were still active, displaying flowing alien text and what were clearly system readouts. But what made Jake's breath catch was the realization of what he was looking at. This wasn't just a power core. Based on the complexity of the surrounding systems and the massive scale of the energy output readings on his sensors, this was a faster-than-light drive core. And it was still functional. Jake spent the next several hours exploring the engineering section, his excitement growing with each discovery. The alien technology was incredibly advanced, but it followed logical principles. Energy flowed through crystalline matrices. Control systems responded to touch interfaces. Backup systems activated when primary systems failed. Most importantly, the ship's computer core was still active. When Jake finally worked up the courage to interface his suit's computer with one of the alien terminals, he was amazed to find that the system responded. The ship's artificial intelligence, or whatever passed for one among its builders, was still functional after all these years. Communication was impossible at first. The language barrier was absolute, and the alien computer systems operated on principles completely foreign to human technology. But Jake was nothing if not persistent. He'd learned to communicate with alien AIs before, during first contact situations with 3 different species. The breakthrough came when he began using mathematical concepts, prime numbers, geometric progressions, basic physics equations, universal constants that any spacefaring species would recognize. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to establish a basic communication protocol with the ship's computer. What he learned in those first few hours of contact changed everything. The ship was called something his translator approximated as Star Wanderer. Its crew had been explorers from a species that called themselves the Vorthak. They had been mapping this region of space when they encountered something that their own records could only describe as the darkness that devours. The ship had been infected, for lack of a better word, by some kind of hostile entity. The Vorthak crew had fought desperately to contain it, finally sacrificing themselves to seal the infected sections and prevent the entity from spreading to other ships. The last surviving crew members had programmed the computer to maintain minimal power and weight, hoping that someday another spacefaring species might find the ship and learn from their sacrifice. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he absorbed this information. The sealed sections of the ship weren't just damaged areas, they were quarantine zones, and he had no way of knowing whether whatever had killed the Vorthak was still contained within them. But his immediate concern was survival. The ship's atmospheric systems were still functional, providing breathable air throughout most of the vessel. The emergency food synthesis systems could be adapted to human nutritional needs with some modification. Most importantly, the FTL drive core was not only functional but actively maintaining itself, waiting for someone with the knowledge to activate it. Jake had that knowledge. His 20 years of experience with various alien technologies had given him an intuitive understanding of how most FTL systems operated. The principles were universal, even if the implementation varied wildly between species. The Vorthak drive system was elegant in its complexity. Rather than the brute force approach used by human FTL drives, which tore holes in space-time through massive energy expenditure, the Vorthak system worked by convincing the universe that the ship was already where it wanted to be. It was a subtle manipulation of quantum probability that required far less energy and produced none of the dangerous radiation that made human FTL travel so hazardous. Over the following days, Jake immersed himself in understanding the ship's systems. The computer core was incredibly helpful, providing detailed schematics and operational manuals once it understood what he was trying to learn. The Vorthak had been a generous species, apparently, believing that knowledge should be shared freely among all spacefaring races. Jake learned that the Star Wanderer had been one of a fleet of exploration vessels, all equipped with the most advanced technology the Vorthak could produce: self-repairing hull materials, quantum-level manufacturing systems, AI cores capable of independent thought and creativity. The ship was designed to operate for centuries, without external support, exploring the galaxy and gathering knowledge for its creators. But the Vorthak were gone now, according to the ship's records. The entity they had encountered had spread throughout their space, consuming their worlds and their people. The Star Wanderer was possibly the last remnant of an entire civilization, carrying within its memory cores the complete history and knowledge of a dead species. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his own survival anymore. This ship represented the last hope of preserving an entire culture, and if he could learn to operate its advanced systems, he might be able to return to human space with technology that could revolutionize civilization. But first, he had to deal with the sealed sections. The ship's AI had been very clear about the danger they represented. The entity that had killed the Vorthak was unlike anything in the computer's databases. It existed partially in normal space and partially in what the Vorthak called the deep void, a parallel dimension that intersected with normal reality at quantum levels. The entity could corrupt both living beings and artificial systems, turning them into extensions of itself. The Vorthak crew had discovered this too late. After nearly half their number had been compromised, the final battle had been fought not with weapons, but with desperate attempts to sever the entity's connection to normal space. Jake spent days studying the containment systems, learning how they worked and what would happen if they failed. The sealed sections were held in a kind of dimensional stasis, isolated from both normal space and the deep void. But the containment required constant power, and the ship's energy reserves were not infinite. According to the computer's calculations, the containment would fail within the next few months if nothing was done to reinforce it. When that happened, the entity would be free to begin spreading again, and this time, there might not be anyone left to stop it. Jake realized he was facing an impossible choice. He could attempt to restore the ship's full functionality and use it to return to human space, potentially bringing advanced technology that could benefit all of humanity. But doing so would require powering up systems that had been dormant for decades, systems that the entity might be able to influence if the containment fields weakened even slightly. Or, he could focus on permanently reinforcing the containment, ensuring that the entity remained trapped forever. But that would likely require sacrificing the ship's FTL capabilities, stranding him permanently in this remote system with no hope of rescue. As Jake wrestled with this decision, he began to understand what the Vorthak crew had faced in their final hours. They had possessed technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved. But even they had been helpless against an enemy that existed partially outside normal reality. The entity was patient, according to the ship's records. It could wait decades or centuries for an opportunity to escape. It had no interest in negotiation or coexistence. Its only purpose was to spread and consume, turning entire galaxies into extensions of its alien consciousness. But Jake was not ready to give up. He was human, and humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy for refusing to accept impossible situations. Where other species saw inevitable defeat, humans saw challenges to be overcome through stubbornness, ingenuity, and sheer bloody-minded determination. Jake began formulating a plan that the Vorthak computer initially dismissed as impossible. Instead of choosing between escaping and maintaining containment, he would attempt to do both. He would restore the ship to full functionality, while simultaneously finding a way to permanently neutralize the entity. It was ambitious to the point of insanity. The Vorthak had been a species with thousands of years of advanced scientific development, and they had failed to find a solution. What could one human pilot possibly accomplish that an entire civilization could not? But Jake had advantages the Vorthak had lacked. He was an outsider, unburdened by their assumptions about what was possible. His human brain processed information differently than theirs had, making connections that might not occur to a Vorthak mind. Most importantly, he had access to their complete scientific databases, including research they had never had time to complete. Over the next several weeks, Jake threw himself into understanding every aspect of the ship's technology. He studied quantum mechanics from a Vorthak perspective, learning theories that wouldn't be developed by human science for another century. He explored their understanding of dimensional physics, discovering principles that explained how the entity could exist in multiple realities simultaneously. Most intriguingly, he learned about Vorthak experiments with what they called reality anchoring, techniques for stabilizing the quantum foam that made up the foundation of space-time. The research had been theoretical when the ship was lost, but Jake could see applications that the original researchers had missed. If he could create a stable quantum anchor using the ship's manufacturing systems, he might be able to permanently sever the entity's connection to the deep void. It would require modifications to the ship's core systems that could easily destroy the vessel if he made a mistake. But it was the only plan he could devise that offered any hope of success. Jake began his work systematically, starting with the ship's manufacturing bay. The Vorthak systems could fabricate materials at the atomic level, creating substances that existed nowhere in nature. With the computer's help, he began producing the components he would need for his quantum anchor. Each piece had to be perfect. The slightest flaw in the crystalline matrices would cause catastrophic resonance failures. The energy conduits needed to be calibrated to frequencies that would disrupt the entity's quantum signature without destabilizing local space-time. It was work that required absolute precision and unwavering concentration. But as Jake labored over his impossible project, he began to feel something he hadn't experienced since his stranding: hope. The ship's systems responded to his touch, as if they recognized a kindred spirit. The computer offered suggestions and corrections with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. For the first time since the Vorthak had died, the Star Wanderer had a purpose again. Jake didn't know whether his plan would work. The physics involved were beyond anything attempted by either human or Vorthak science. But he was determined to try. The alternative, allowing the entity to eventually escape and spread throughout the galaxy, was unacceptable. As he worked, Jake found himself thinking about the human colonies back in civilized space. His own world, with its blue skies and green forests, the space stations where he had learned to fly, filled with people living ordinary lives in extraordinary circumstances. All of it was at risk if he failed. But Jake Morrison had never been one to back down from a challenge. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was finding ways to accomplish the impossible. 3 weeks into his impossible project, Jake had transformed the Star Wanderer's manufacturing bay into something that would have amazed even its original builders. Crystalline components grew in precise geometric patterns within quantum field generators, their internal structures calibrated to frequencies that barely existed in normal spacetime. The ship's computer had become Jake's closest ally in this endeavor. What had started as basic communication through mathematical concepts had evolved into something approaching genuine friendship. The AI possessed a curiosity and creativity that reminded Jake of his best human colleagues, combined with computational abilities that could process quantum mechanics equations faster than he could think them. The computer had even chosen a name for itself during their long working sessions. It called itself Keeper, explaining through their improvised translation system that it saw itself as the guardian of Vorthak knowledge and memories. Jake found it oddly comforting to have a companion, even an artificial one, during the lonely work shifts. But the project was taking longer than Jake had originally calculated. Each quantum anchor component required days of precise manufacturing, followed by extensive testing to ensure it would function correctly when exposed to the entity's dimensional interference. One failed component could destroy the entire array, and Jake had no margin for error. More troubling were the signs that the entity was becoming aware of his activities. The containment fields remained stable, but sensors throughout the ship detected subtle fluctuations in the sealed sections, energy patterns that suggested something was probing the barriers, testing for weaknesses. Keeper confirmed Jake's worst fears during one of their evening discussions. The entity was indeed conscious and intelligent, far more so than the Vorthak had realized during their final battle. It had spent the decades since containment studying the ship's systems, learning how they functioned, and searching for ways to influence them remotely. Jake's presence and activities had triggered increased attention from the entity. It could sense the quantum manipulations he was performing and recognize them as a potential threat. The probing of the containment fields was becoming more systematic, more focused. The entity was preparing for another escape attempt. This knowledge added urgency to Jake's work, but also gave him valuable intelligence. If the entity was concerned about his quantum anchor project, then his approach was likely correct. The physics behind reality anchoring could indeed threaten something that existed partially outside normal space-time. Jake accelerated his schedule, working 18-hour days while Keeper monitored the containment systems around the clock. Sleep became a luxury he could barely afford. The ship's medical bay provided stimulants that kept him alert and functioning, but Jake knew he was pushing his body beyond safe limits. The breakthrough came during his 4th week aboard the Star Wanderer. Jake had been struggling with the quantum resonance calculations needed to synchronize his anchor array when Keeper presented him with a radical suggestion. Instead of trying to anchor the entity in normal space where it could be contained, why not anchor it exclusively in the deep void where it belonged? The concept was elegant in its simplicity. The entity's power came from its ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, drawing energy from the deep void while manifesting effects in normal space. If Jake could sever that connection permanently, forcing the entity to exist only in the deep void, it would be effectively banished from normal reality forever. But the quantum mechanics involved were staggering. Jake would need to create what amounted to a dimensional fault line, a permanent rift in spacetime that would prevent the entity from crossing between realities. The energy requirements alone would drain the ship's power core to dangerously low levels. More concerning was the possibility that the process could destabilize local spacetime if not executed perfectly. Jake could potentially create a black hole or temporal anomaly that would destroy the entire star system. The margin for error was so narrow that even Keeper's computational abilities could only estimate a 63% chance of success. Jake stared at the calculations for hours, weighing the risks against the alternatives. Leaving the entity contained would eventually result in its escape when the containment fields failed. Attempting to flee to human space might allow the entity to influence the ship's systems during transit, potentially spreading the infection to human colonies. But trying to banish the entity permanently could destroy everything within light years of their position. In the end, the decision was easier than Jake expected. He thought about his fellow humans exploring the galaxy, believing themselves safe from threats they couldn't even imagine. He thought about the Vorthak, who had sacrificed everything to prevent this entity from spreading. Most importantly, he thought about the billions of innocent lives that would be lost if he chose the safe path and failed. Jake began modifying the ship's power distribution systems to support his banishment array. The work required extensive alterations to the Star Wanderer's core architecture. Quantum field generators needed to be repositioned throughout the ship to create the precise resonance patterns necessary for dimensional manipulation. Keeper assisted by controlling the ship's automated systems, moving massive components through the corridors with mechanical precision. The AI had become genuinely invested in the project's success, despite the risks to its own existence. Jake realized that Keeper understood the stakes as clearly as he did. As the modifications progressed, Jake began experiencing strange sensations. Brief moments of disorientation when reality seemed to shift slightly around him. Whispers at the edge of hearing that spoke in languages he didn't recognize. The entity was becoming more active, its influence growing stronger as Jake's work neared completion. Keeper reported similar effects in the ship's computer systems. Random data corruption in non-critical files. Sensor readings that didn't match reality. Brief activation of systems that should have remained dormant. The entity was testing the ship's defenses, probing for any weakness it could exploit. Jake implemented additional security protocols, isolating critical systems from the ship's main network. He created multiple backup copies of the banishment array control programs, storing them in separate quantum storage devices. If the entity managed to corrupt the main computer systems, Jake would still be able to activate his device manually. The final week of preparation was a race against time. The entity's influence was growing stronger daily, affecting both Jake's perception and the ship's systems. Keeper estimated that containment would fail within 72 hours. regardless of Jake's interventions. The dimensional barriers were weakening under constant pressure from the deep void. Jake worked with desperate efficiency, installing the last components of his quantum anchor array while fighting off waves of disorientation and false memories. The entity was trying to influence his mind directly, flooding his consciousness with visions of failure and death. Only Keeper's constant monitoring and intervention prevented Jake from making critical errors. On the final day, as Jake made his last preparations for the banishment attempt, the entity made its most direct assault yet. Containment field strength dropped to 15% as something hammered against the dimensional barriers with increasing fury. Emergency alarms echoed through the corridors as the ship's systems struggled to maintain the failing containment. Jake and Keeper worked frantically to complete the quantum anchor array before the entity broke free. The device was incredibly complex, requiring precise synchronization between 47 separate quantum field generators positioned throughout the ship. Each generator needed to activate in a specific sequence, creating cascading resonance waves that would tear open a controlled rift in space-time. But as Jake initiated the startup sequence, disaster struck. One of the containment fields collapsed completely, releasing a portion of the entity into the ship's main corridors. Jake watched in horror as his sensor readings showed reality itself becoming unstable in several sections of the vessel. The entity manifested as areas of twisted space-time where the laws of physics operated differently. Gravity fluctuated wildly. Time moved at different rates in different locations. Most terrifyingly, Jake could sense an alien consciousness pressing against his mind, trying to overwhelm his thoughts with its own inhuman perspective. Keeper's voice crackled over the communication system, distorted by dimensional interference. Jake, the entity is attempting to access the ship's core systems. I am implementing emergency isolation protocols, but I cannot maintain them indefinitely. Jake forced himself to focus on the quantum anchor controls despite the chaos surrounding him. The array was nearly ready for activation, but it needed 17 more minutes to reach full power. 17 minutes during which he had to prevent the entity from corrupting the device or overwhelming the ship's remaining defenses. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Jake fought not with weapons, but with his understanding of advanced physics and his stubborn refusal to surrender. When the entity tried to corrupt the quantum generators, Jake rerouted power through backup systems. When it attempted to influence the ship's AI, Jake activated isolation protocols that severed Keeper's connection to compromised systems. Most critically, Jake discovered that his human intuition gave him an unexpected advantage. The entity operated according to the logical principles of its own reality, following predictable patterns that Keeper's computational abilities could analyze and counter. But Jake's uniquely human ability to make intuitive leaps and irrational decisions allowed him to respond in ways the entity couldn't predict. As the quantum anchor array reached full power, Jake felt the entity's attention focus completely on him. The alien consciousness pressed against his mind with tremendous force, trying to overwhelm his identity with its own vast, inhuman perspective. For a terrifying moment, Jake felt his sense of self beginning to dissolve into something larger and utterly alien. But human stubbornness proved stronger than cosmic horror. Jake held on to his memories of home, his determination to protect the innocent, and his absolute refusal to accept defeat. The entity might be vast and ancient, but it had never encountered anything quite like human obstinacy before. With 15 seconds remaining until full array activation, Jake made a final discovery that changed everything. The entity wasn't just trying to escape the Star Wanderer. It was trying to prevent Jake from activating the quantum anchor because it understood what the device would really do. The banishment array wouldn't just force the entity back into the deep void. If calibrated correctly, it would create a permanent dimensional barrier around this entire region of space, preventing anything from the deep void from ever entering normal reality again. Jake wasn't just stopping one entity. He was creating a shield that would protect the galaxy from an entire dimension of hostile consciousness. But the power requirements for such a massive effect would completely drain the ship's power core. The Star Wanderer would be left without life support, without propulsion, without any hope of ever returning to civilized space. Jake would be sacrificing not just his own life, but any chance of returning to warn humanity about the threat from the deep void. Jake looked at the activation controls and realized he was facing the same choice the Vorthak crew had made decades ago. Sacrifice everything to protect countless innocent lives from a threat they would never even know existed. The decision took less than a second. Jake's finger slammed down on the activation control just as the entity made its final, desperate attempt to stop him. The quantum anchor array activated with a sound that existed in dimensions humans had no names for. Reality twisted around the Star Wanderer, as 47 separate rifts tore open in space-time simultaneously. The ship shuddered under forces that challenged the basic structure of existence. Jake felt the entity's scream of rage and terror as it was pulled inexorably back toward the deep void. But instead of simply being contained, it was being banished permanently. The dimensional barriers Jake had created were sealing behind it, cutting off its connection to normal space forever. The process lasted only minutes, but to Jake, it felt like hours. He watched on his instruments as space-time stabilized around them, the quantum rifts closing in precisely calculated sequence. The entity's presence faded from his awareness like a nightmare dissolving in daylight. When it was over, Jake found himself alone in the command center of a dead ship. The power core had been completely drained, leaving only emergency batteries to maintain minimal life support. But his instruments confirmed what he had hoped to achieve. A stable, dimensional barrier now surrounded this region of space in a sphere roughly 10 light-years in diameter. Nothing from the deep void could penetrate it, and nothing could leave normal space to enter the deep void. Keeper's voice reached him through the emergency communication system, weak but triumphant. "Jake, we have succeeded. The entity is gone, and the barrier is stable. You have accomplished something the Vorthak could never have imagined." Jake slumped in his chair, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. He had won, but at the cost of being permanently stranded in deep space. The Star Wanderer would never fly again. Its systems would gradually fail over the coming months, and eventually, Jake would die alone among the stars. But as Jake contemplated his fate, Keeper presented him with one final surprise. The AI had been analyzing the quantum anchor array's effects on the ship's systems, and had discovered something remarkable. The dimensional manipulations had created unexpected interactions with the ship's quantum manufacturing systems. Instead of simply draining the power core, the banishment process had fundamentally altered the Star Wanderer's relationship with space-time. The ship now existed in a stable quantum state that required virtually no energy to maintain. More importantly, the manufacturing systems could now create matter directly from quantum foam, using principles that the original Vorthak designers had never discovered. Jake stared at the readings in disbelief. Not only had he survived his desperate gamble, he had accidentally transformed the Star Wanderer into something unprecedented, a completely self-sufficient vessel that could potentially operate forever without any external resources. The ship was no longer just a repository of Vorthak knowledge. It had become something new, a fusion of Vorthak technology and human ingenuity that transcended what either species had achieved alone. And Jake was its sole guardian, responsible for deciding how this incredible power would be used. As Jake began to understand the full implications of what he had accomplished, he realized his adventure was just beginning. The Star Wanderer could now travel anywhere in the galaxy without fear of fuel limitations. Its manufacturing systems could create anything he needed, from food and air to complex technological devices. Most importantly, the ship's quantum modifications had given it capabilities that no other vessel in the galaxy possessed. Jake could return to human space as the bearer of technology that would revolutionize civilization. Or he could use the ship to explore regions of the galaxy that no one had ever seen, pushing the boundaries of known space further than any previous expedition. But first, Jake needed to rest and recover from his ordeal. The battle with the entity had pushed him to the limits of human endurance. As emergency systems restored full life support throughout the ship, Jake allowed himself to sleep for the first time in days. When he woke, he would face decisions that would affect the future of human civilization. But for now, it was enough to know that he had succeeded where an entire advanced civilization had failed. The galaxy was safe from the threat of the deep void, and Jake Morrison had achieved something truly impossible. He had not just survived being marooned on a derelict starship, he had transformed it into the most advanced vessel in the galaxy and made himself the guardian of knowledge that could reshape the future of all spacefaring species. The real adventure was just beginning. Jake woke to the soft hum of perfectly functioning ship systems and the gentle glow of Vorthak emergency lighting. For a moment, he forgot where he was and expected to see the familiar bulkheads of his human scout vessel. Then, memory returned, along with the incredible reality of his situation. The Star Wanderer had been completely transformed by the quantum modifications, where before many systems had been damaged or dormant, now everything functioned with an efficiency that surpassed even the ship's original specifications. The quantum manufacturing systems were producing fresh air, water, and food of better quality than anything Jake had tasted during his 20 years in space. Keeper's voice greeted him as he made his way to the command center. "Good morning, Jake. You have been asleep for 14 hours and 37 minutes. All ship systems are operating at optimal efficiency, and I have completed a full analysis of our new capabilities." Jake settled into the captain's chair, which had somehow adjusted itself to perfectly fit his human proportions. "Show me what we're working with, Keeper." The main view screen came alive with displays that made Jake's breath catch. The Star Wanderer now possessed capabilities that defied everything he thought he knew about physics and engineering. The quantum modifications had created a stable energy loop that drew power directly from the quantum vacuum, providing unlimited energy for all ship systems. More remarkably, the manufacturing systems could now create any material or device by manipulating matter at the subatomic level. Jake could literally think of something he needed, and the ship's systems could produce it within hours. The only limitation was his own imagination and understanding of what he wanted to create. The FTL drive had been enhanced as well. Instead of the original Vorthak system that convinced the universe the ship was already at its destination, the quantum modifications allowed the Star Wanderer to exist in multiple locations simultaneously until Jake chose which reality to collapse into. He could travel instantaneously anywhere in the galaxy, or even explore multiple star systems at once before deciding which one to visit physically. But perhaps most importantly, the ship's sensor systems could now detect and analyze threats from the deep void before they could establish a foothold in normal space. The Star Wanderer had become the galaxy's first line of defense against entities like the one Jake had banished. Jake spent the next several days exploring his transformed vessel and learning to use its new capabilities. The ship responded to his thoughts and intentions as much as to direct commands. When he wished he could better understand some piece of Vorthak technology, the manufacturing systems would create an interface perfectly suited to human cognition. When he felt lonely during the long night shifts, Keeper would manifest holographic avatars of Vorthak crew members to keep him company. But with great power came great responsibility. And Jake found himself grappling with decisions that no human had ever faced before. The Star Wanderer contained the complete scientific and cultural knowledge of an entire civilization. Its manufacturing systems could create technology centuries ahead of anything humanity possessed. Its enhanced FTL drive could open new regions of the galaxy to exploration and colonization. The question was, what should Jake do with these capabilities? His first instinct was to return immediately to human space and share everything he had learned. The medical knowledge alone could extend human lifespans by centuries. The manufacturing technology could end scarcity and poverty throughout human-controlled space. The advanced FTL systems could allow humanity to spread across the entire galaxy within a few generations. But Keeper raised troubling concerns about this approach. Human civilization, for all its positive qualities, was still relatively primitive by galactic standards. Introducing Vorthak technology too quickly could destabilize human society, or lead to conflicts that would make the entity from the deep void seem benign by comparison. The Vorthak themselves had faced similar challenges when they first developed their advanced technologies. Their historical records spoke of centuries of social upheaval, as traditional power structures collapsed and reformed around new technological realities. Many Vorthak worlds had suffered through devastating wars before achieving the peaceful, scientific society that had eventually produced the Star Wanderer. Humanity was arguably less prepared for such rapid technological advancement than the Vorthak had been. Human society was still organized around scarcity-based economics and territorial nation-states. Introducing unlimited manufacturing capabilities and instantaneous interstellar travel could trigger conflicts that would tear human civilization apart. Jake wrestled with these concerns for weeks as he continued exploring the ship's capabilities. He used the enhanced sensors to observe human colonies from light years away, watching the daily lives of people who had no idea that their entire future hung in the balance. The responsibility was overwhelming, but as Jake studied human society through the Star Wanderer's advanced sensors, he began to see something that gave him hope. Humans might be primitive by galactic standards, but they possessed qualities that the Vorthak had lacked: adaptability, resilience, an almost reckless willingness to embrace change and challenge. Most importantly, humans had something the Vorthak had never developed: a strong tradition of questioning authority and challenging established systems. Where the Vorthak had been unified in their scientific pursuits, humans were gloriously, chaotically diverse in their approaches to problems. Jake realized that this diversity might be exactly what humanity needed to handle advanced Vorthak technology responsibly. Instead of introducing everything at once to a centralized authority, he could share different technologies with different human groups, allowing them to develop and test applications independently. He began developing a plan that would have seemed impossible before the quantum modifications. Using the Star Wanderer's ability to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, Jake could visit every major human colony and research station in the galaxy. He could assess each group's readiness for specific technologies and introduce them gradually, monitoring the results and adjusting his approach as needed. But first, Jake decided to test his theories closer to home. He used the ship's sensors to locate the nearest human research station, a deep space facility studying subspace physics at the edge of the Kepler system. The station was small, with only 43 researchers and support staff, making it an ideal testing ground for his plans. Dr. Sarah Chen, the station's chief physicist, nearly fainted when the Star Wanderer materialized directly alongside her facility. Jake's initial contact was handled carefully, with extensive verification procedures to prove his identity and confirm that he wasn't some kind of alien infiltrator. When Jake finally told his story, Dr. Chen's reaction was everything he had hoped for. Instead of demanding immediate access to all of the ship's technologies, she asked thoughtful questions about their implications for human society. Her first concern was whether the technologies could be used safely without causing unintended consequences. Jake spent 3 days at the research station, sharing carefully selected information about Vorthak physics and manufacturing techniques. He watched with approval as Dr. Chen and her team approached each new concept with scientific skepticism, testing their understanding before moving on to more advanced topics. Most importantly, the research team immediately grasped the social implications of what Jake was offering. They began developing protocols for introducing new technologies gradually, with extensive safeguards to prevent misuse or premature application. Jake's test was a success. Humans could indeed handle advanced technology responsibly if it was introduced properly. Dr. Chen's team became Jake's first collaborators in what he came to think of as the Great Advancement Project. Over the following months, Jake visited dozens of human research facilities, universities, and exploration outposts. Each group received technologies specifically suited to their expertise and current research projects. Medical researchers got access to Vorthak biological sciences. Engineers received manufacturing techniques that could revolutionize space construction. Physicists learned about quantum principles that opened entirely new fields of study. But Jake was careful never to give any single group enough technology to destabilize the entire human sphere. The Vorthak knowledge was parceled out in carefully measured doses, always accompanied by warnings about potential dangers and recommendations for safe application. The results exceeded Jake's most optimistic predictions. Human researchers approached Vorthak technology with the same creative chaos that had characterized their species throughout history. They combined Vorthak principles with uniquely human insights, creating hybrid technologies that were often more practical and versatile than the original Vorthak versions. More importantly, the human research community began policing itself. When one group developed something potentially dangerous, others would immediately begin working on safeguards and limitations. The competitive nature of human science, which had sometimes been a weakness, became a strength in managing advanced technology. Jake's greatest success came when he shared the basics of quantum manufacturing with a terraforming project in the Centauri system. The engineers there used the principles to develop self-replicating construction systems that could transform dead worlds into garden paradises in decades rather than centuries. But instead of using this capability to claim territory for themselves, the terraforming team immediately shared their techniques with other colony projects throughout human space. Within a year, humans were establishing new worlds at a rate that astonished even Jake. The Star Wanderer's role in all this remained largely secret. Jake appeared at research stations as a mysterious benefactor with access to incredible technologies. But he never revealed the full extent of his ship's capabilities or the story of how he had acquired them. The less humanity knew about the entity from the deep void, the better. Keeper supported this approach wholeheartedly. The AI had become genuinely fond of human researchers, appreciating their creative approach to problem-solving and their willingness to ask unconventional questions. Many of the human insights into Vorthak technology had surprised even Keeper, leading to improvements in the Star Wanderer's own systems. But Jake's activities had not gone unnoticed by other powers in the galaxy. The rapid advancement of human technology attracted attention from several established spacefaring species, some of whom were not pleased to see a young race developing such sophisticated capabilities. The first direct challenge came from the hegemony of Kalos, a militaristic empire that had dominated this region of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Their fleets suddenly appeared at the borders of human space, demanding to know how humanity had acquired such advanced technology. Jake found himself facing a decision that the Vorthak had never encountered. They had been the dominant species in their region of the galaxy, free to develop their technology without external interference. But humanity was surrounded by older, more established civilizations that might see human advancement as a threat to their own power. The hegemony ultimatum was delivered to the human colonial government on New Geneva. Surrender all advanced technologies to Kalos authorities for safeguarding or face military occupation of all human worlds. Jake's response was swift and decisive. The Star Wanderer appeared in the middle of the Kalos battle fleet, broadcasting on all frequencies. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the exploration vessel Star Wanderer," his message began. "The technologies being developed by human researchers are under my protection. Any attempt to interfere with human scientific advancement will be met with appropriate response." The Kalos fleet commander, Admiral Thexvar, was unimpressed by what appeared to be a single alien vessel challenging an entire battle fleet. His response was to order an immediate attack on the Star Wanderer. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration. Jake had no desire to harm the Kalos crews, but he needed to make a point about humanity's new capabilities. Using the ship's quantum manufacturing systems, he created a swarm of micro-drones that disabled every weapon system in the Kalos fleet without causing a single casualty. Then, using the enhanced FTL drive, Jake transported the entire enemy fleet to the far side of Kalos space, leaving them stranded light years from any military support. The message was clear. Humans now possess technology that could neutralize any conventional threat. Admiral Thexvar's report to the Kalos High Command described weapons and capabilities that seemed impossible even by advanced galactic standards. The Star Wanderer had demonstrated the ability to manipulate matter and energy on scales that defied known physics. More troubling, it had shown mercy when it could easily have destroyed the entire fleet. The hegemony's response was to immediately open diplomatic channels with the human government, requesting negotiations rather than risking another confrontation with the mysterious protector of human space. But Jake's demonstration had larger consequences throughout the galaxy. Word spread quickly about humanity's seemingly impossible advancement and their mysterious guardian vessel. Some species saw this as an opportunity to establish beneficial relationships with a rising power. Others viewed it as a threat that needed to be eliminated before it could challenge the existing galactic order. Jake realized that his actions had fundamentally altered humanity's position in galactic politics. Humans were no longer a minor species to be ignored or exploited. They had become a significant power that others would need to respect, whether they liked it or not. But with this new status came new responsibilities. Jake found himself serving as humanity's unofficial guardian and diplomat, using the Star Wanderer's capabilities to protect human interests while trying to maintain peace with other galactic civilizations. The most challenging moment came when the ancient ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who claimed to be the galaxy's oldest civilization, demanded an audience with the mysterious protector of humanity. Their representatives appeared as shimmering fields of light in the Star Wanderer's main bay, speaking in harmonics that bypassed Jake's ears and resonated directly in his mind. "Young Guardian," their collective voice intoned, "you wield power that was not meant for flesh and blood beings. The technologies you protect could reshape the galaxy itself. We have seen such power before, and we know where it leads." The ethereals revealed that they had encountered the Vorthok millennia ago, before their civilization had fallen to the entity from the deep void. They had tried to warn the Vorthok about the dangers of their quantum manipulation research, but had been ignored. The result had been the opening of pathways between normal space and the deep void that had ultimately doomed an entire species. "But you are different," the ethereals acknowledged. "You have not merely inherited this power. You have transformed it. The quantum barriers you created have stabilized the boundary between realities in ways we thought impossible. Perhaps flesh and blood consciousness possesses insights that energy beings lack." Jake found himself in negotiations that determined humanity's future relationship with the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilization. The ethereals offered to share their own advanced knowledge with humanity, but only under strict conditions designed to prevent the mistakes that had doomed the Vorthok. The agreement they reached established humanity as a protected species under ethereal oversight, but with guarantees of independence and self-determination. In exchange, Jake would serve as liaison between humanity and the galaxy's other ancient powers, helping to maintain the balance that kept galactic civilization stable. Jake accepted these responsibilities, knowing that he had little choice. The Star Wanderer's capabilities made him one of the most powerful individuals in the galaxy, whether he wanted that power or not. But he also recognized that this position gave him unique opportunities to guide humanity's development in positive directions. Over the following years, Jake watched with pride as human civilization transformed itself using carefully introduced Vorthok technologies. Medical advances eliminated most diseases and extended lifespans by centuries. Manufacturing improvements ended scarcity throughout human space. Advanced FTL drives opened new regions of the galaxy to human exploration and colonization. But most importantly, humans retained their essential humanity throughout this transformation. They remained curious, creative, and wonderfully chaotic in their approaches to problems. They used their new capabilities to build art installations that spanned entire star systems and to create music that resonated across multiple dimensions. Jake had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He had not only survived being marooned on a derelict starship, he had used that experience to elevate his entire species to a position of respect and influence among the galaxy's great civilizations. The Star Wanderer continued to serve as humanity's guardian and guide, with Jake as its captain and Keeper as his trusted partner. Together, they explored the galaxy's most remote regions, always watching for new threats from the deep void and working to maintain the peace that allowed all species to thrive. And sometimes, late in the ship's night cycle, Jake would stand at the observation deck and look out at the stars, remembering the desperate pilot who had once faced certain death in the void. That man could never have imagined the incredible journey that lay ahead, or the role he would play in shaping the future of galactic civilization. But Jake Morrison had learned that humans excel at achieving the impossible, especially when everyone else believes it can't be done. The galaxy was a better place because one stubborn human pilot had refused to accept defeat. And that was exactly the way it should be.